Åh, vad det är härligt att vara här. Ni är väldigt många, så det är skönt med stödet. Det här är en enorm sal att prata till. Men många av er känner jag och många är också nya. And in order to enable a dialogue with all our international guests and the international speakers, I'm actually going to turn to English and continue in English. This is my favorite place in the world. It's a spot in Central Park, and I like it because it's a mix of all the things I like. The urban landscape, the crowds that gather around the different spaces in the park, and of course, nature. And this is one of the places where I find inspiration. This is a completely different space. This is what the workspace looked like when I started in the digital industry 18 years ago. And have been around for so long that I was recently called the oldest woman in tech when I was introduced at an event a few weeks ago. And I'm trying to see it as a compliment. And talent and ambition are global today. But historically and back then, there were significant barriers to starting a tech business. And for a long time, information and computing power were concentrated to small pockets of the world and corners of physical rooms such as this one. In 1995, me and my team, we looked to Silicon Valley for inspiration and borrowed concepts and ideas for services and also the geek culture from companies like Yahoo, eBay and Wired. And now and then we broaden our perspective and and the startup scene in Israel also caught our eye. And we looked at some of the technology concepts coming out of that market. But basically, Silicon Valley was our view of the tech world. We're actually so good at borrowing and copying that Stockholm became a real tech hotspot. And I don't know if those of you who are as old as I am, you remember the cover of Newsweek magazine in February 2000, back when Newsweek was still a paper magazine, when Stockholm was called the internet capital of Europe. And today, what we're going to do here on stage is to look out and look at some of the interesting trends and ideas that you could actually borrow or steal with pride and give us a kind of a different perspective than our regular ethnocentric one. So the theme of this year's Webbdagarna has inspired us to create a session with the following message. As global internet access has grown dramatically in recent years, global expansion is where the biggest opportunities lies. And in every meeting I've had in the last weeks with managers and product developers of companies like Klarna, like Spotify, they're all talking about how to understand and how to harvest opportunities in emerging markets. And today, companies can really come from anywhere. From Stockholm, from Lagos, from Cairo. Ideas and opportunities are everywhere. If you know where to look, you can be inspired by them, you can learn, and you can build on them. So my question to you today is really, where are you looking and what are you seeing? And in order for today to give you some fresh perspectives, since you've heard me before, I've invited someone who's a lot more interesting and a lot more relevant to the topic than I am. So please help me in welcoming Perihan Abou-Zeid with a warm hand. Welcome on stage.
Thank you, Beata.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
You're from Cairo, and you're and you're an entrepreneur, and you're really recently, you're presently living in Boston. What takes you to Boston?
Correct. So I'm actually right now doing my MBA at MIT, which is a great school for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs want to be, basically.
Yes, and you have, despite your young age, you have a long career in tech and media. Tell us, how did you start out?
By sheer coincidence. So basically, my background in college was in business administration, concentration on marketing, and I was always interested in e-commerce, and I took some courses in that space. And I worked for a couple of tech companies, including Google, but then one day my friends, after the revolution in April 2011, told me that we're starting a media production company. Do you want to come on board? And I said, hell yeah. And basically I joined, and since then I love the industry and I've stuck around.
Mm-hmm. And we'll hear more about your ventures. You also started the first online supermarket in Cairo. What's the e-commerce scene like in Egypt?
It's quite challenging, actually, because we don't have any infrastructure for e-commerce. We don't have the laws, the legal infrastructure specifically. So when I started the online supermarket, I had to incorporate as a physical supermarket because there was no e-commerce law at that time. So
and tell us more. What did you do? How did you build it? And what was the reactions from the consumers?
Well, the first thing, and I think that's a message for everybody, is I looked for the talent that can join me and basically build the technology, because I didn't have the money to invest in building the website and the back-end data. So basically, I located the talent, somebody from college with me, and then we built it, and then we started marketing the typical way, and then we basically, sold groceries online.
Mm. And it worked out?
It worked out perfectly, actually, for 2 years, and it was very hectic for us, and we decided in the end to sell it and put it to an end, basically, because it was just hectic for us to run it, only 2 of us, without the right capital.
Are there great opportunities within e-commerce in the Arab region?
There's definitely great opportunities because Arabs are great consumers. We're one of the very few nations, specifically in Egypt, that consumerism doesn't get affected whatsoever by crises. So people continue to buy products even if there is like an economic crisis. So definitely e-commerce is a great opportunity, especially with the problems in traffic and everything. People don't enjoy going to the physical store as much.
And what are the dominant players, local or international ones?
Local, absolutely local, and we're going to talk a lot about that.
Mm-hmm. You've been awarded Best Female Entrepreneur of the Year in the Pan-Arab region. Congratulations.
Thanks.
What is it that you're so good at?
I have no idea. So
you
I didn't
look down in your script.
So I actually asked the judges that selected me for this award what exactly they saw in me, and they told me, and I'm quoting them, I'm not sure if I agree with 100% of everything they said, but they basically told me it's mostly about the passion that I had about the industry that I was, and the business that I was actually building, and how I was able to create business opportunities that didn't exist, and do my homework and researching the market and look in different markets as well that can create good opportunities. So I guess, do your homework and be passionate, and then you can get one of those awards one day.
Mm. And you're passionate about data too, right?
Oh, I love data, and I believe in the power of data. And I think if you don't look for data, then you're going to make a lot of possibly avoidable mistakes. So.
Mm-hmm. You travel a lot. I mean, you're all over, really. We talk about different hotspots in the world, and you've been there. From your perspective, what are some of the more interesting tech hotspots of the world?
So definitely Kenya is incredible. Kenya and South Africa, but specifically Kenya is just amazing as a market and also as emerging entrepreneurial scene there. I've also liked Malaysia very much. It was extremely strong, and an interesting country that's growing on a very strong entrepreneurial ecosystem now is Rwanda. And I believe that there's certain factors that make these countries unique when it comes to the entrepreneurship scene. One of which is the fact that most of the entrepreneurs there actually work on national problems, so they try to address things like education, healthcare, and financial services. So basically, when you work on something that is a pain to every single or an average citizen, basically people support you before anybody else does, before the government, before you look for capital, and it makes it a lot more successful.
So you build with the crowd.
Exactly, exactly. And another factor as well is the fact that emerging markets are still very green when it comes to technological innovation. So what happens is that with little innovation, there's a huge growth opportunity, and you create a huge impact, as opposed to like Silicon Valley or like the developed world, where there is a lot of competition on the innovative space.
We'll hear more about your ventures later in our session. For now on, we'll be each other's sidekicks in order to give you a good outlook. We've also tried to make this sort of give you sort of a map into some of the less known territories of digital opportunities, and to make it more valuable, we put up. Am I doing the clicking in the right way? Yeah, there. We also put up our presentation on SlideShare as we speak. So there's lots more. There are links and there are more background research that you can use, and because we only have a short time on stage. So we hope you find that valuable, and also hope that you will keep in touch and give us feedback and more insights, and those are our Twitter nicks. So let's start by understanding global user behavior. Maps like these are very popular when it comes to describing the increasing interconnectivity between users in the world, and thanks to the penetration of social networks. But it's no longer only about Facebook. And the user behavior is not consistent across the world. You really need to go into different markets and understand what drives the user behavior. User behavior in some of the largest, the most connected markets and countries are gravitating to regional sites, sites based on interest or behavior or just cultural context. And we just see the hours spent on social networks going up, not going down. On the other hand, we see hordes of users using the big US-based networks, meaning that some of the largest communities today are actually truly global. So it's both local and global. And here are some other numbers from the research that we'd like to highlight.
So yeah, so basically the most interesting thing is that 86% of the population of Facebook comes from outside the US. But what's more interesting is that out of this population, 95 million come from China, 68 million come from India, and 42 million come from Brazil. So if you put all these together, they create double the US population. So basically, Facebook becomes sort of the worldwide map of social populations, basically. But here's another more interesting piece of information. The number one country with when it comes to mobile penetration on Facebook, it's not from any of the developed world. It's actually Nigeria, where there's only 25% of smartphone penetration, which I found very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And nearly 25% of the LinkedIn users are in India. In fact, there are more users, there are more Indians than Americans on both LinkedIn and Google+. So next time you do your research for a presentation or a campaign, look for the best practice in India, because that's where you will find the most users and the most activity.
And I would like to bring you to my side of the world, basically. So Saudi Arabia, and this might come as a surprise to many of you, has the highest number of YouTube videos replays on mobile per capita. That's a country with less than 30 million people, and they consume YouTube content a lot more on mobile than any part of the world.
What kind of content are they consuming?
Mostly entertainment. So a lot of it is satire and just pure entertainment content, from soccer to lifestyle to just like movies and short movies.
And who are the producers of this content? Is it global content or is it Saudi content?
Definitely local. So Omar Hussein here in this picture is an example of one of the shows, and he's an ordinary guy. He's not even, he didn't major even in media production or anything, but he believed that he had a talent, and he knocked on some production house's door, and they created a show for him. Now people line up to take pictures with him, so he's become the YouTube celebrity, basically.
Mm. And if you compare, say, Saudi to Nigeria, why is the comparison, just because we know that there's a high social network penetration there, why is why again are the Saudis so keen on YouTube? Are there other cultural aspects that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so definitely I can say that smartphone penetration is extremely high, and or mobile penetration and internet penetration is high in general, but in my opinion, the most significant factor is the fact that YouTube is the #1 entertainment platform. So in Saudi Arabia, there is no movie theaters, and the television is extremely censored. So basically, YouTube becomes the liberal and democratic way of distributing content that's relevant to the audience. And basically, that's why they consume millions and millions of videos every day.
We're always hoping that these tools that we're talking about are sort of driving democratization. Is it, or is it basically just local content cementing the cultural context?
So right now we see strong democracy when it comes to distribution of content, not necessarily in the production of content. And I'm going to talk in the end about my project, which basically tries to solve that initial problem. So definitely anybody now can actually create, like, put their content on any platform, and nobody, to some extent, nobody can actually influence how it goes or how it gets distributed.
In a recent op-ed article in Financial Times, the Skype founder Niklas Zennström argues that Silicon Valley isn't the only game in town, but he's also making it clear that there is no one other tech spot in the world conquering second or first place. So geography isn't becoming geography is becoming less relevant and not more. And we're going to look at some services and some ventures coming out of places outside of the regular hotspots. Let's talk about traffic in Cairo, Perihan.
So this is a real picture, by the way. It's not photoshopped. And this is how traffic looks. And actually, this is a very organized look of the traffic in Cairo. It can get a lot worse. And basically, one great app that got started in Egypt, it's called Bioulak, and it's basically a crowdsourced traffic update app. People submit, they go on the street and then they actually submit on the app what the traffic looks like. And it became very popular. It has millions of users now, and it showed the significance of the power of the crowd. How when you actually engage the audience and you solve a huge pain that they suffer from every single day, then basically you create a great success, and you market it basically using the word of mouth more than you actually have to invest in a lot.
Could a service like this scale globally? What kind of perspectives does the team behind this service have?
So definitely this can scale globally, and we see versions of this already in other parts of the world. And I know that the Egyptian ones, there's 2 of them actually that are already addressing international markets, because here it's not the technology that's difficult, or you need a lot of any legal infrastructure or any even technological infrastructure. What you need basically is good marketing and a very busy market with very, very busy traffic. And basically that's when you can tap into a lot of global opportunities.
Another player that we'd like to highlight is the Gothenburg-based team Saltside. They see huge potential in scaling services locally, such as classified services, like we know them as Blocket in Sweden. This one is a service called Tonaton. It's huge in Ghana. Tokaton. It's in Ghana. They're launching services in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka. with the same kind of infrastructure, but different local skins. And Christopher and Andreas, whom you will meet later on stage this afternoon, will tell us the story in depth, how they scaled mytaste.com, which is in a way a similar story, reaching 36 million users per month. And this kind of scaling requires what Niklas Sandström calls non-native skills. They're not required really to start a company, but they're required to scale a company. So most founders don't have them, but they're really critical. So these include the ability to hire top talent and to build a global brand through effective communication. And that's really that's really the key to growing. Would you like to add anything?
I guess it's just talent. It's always talent when you look the right talent, and you basically partner or work with those talents to get into the local market so that they understand better. That's when you create a very scalable business.
Mm-hmm. Talk about Uber.
Yeah. So raise your hand if you know Uber, if you used it before. I'm not going to talk to you about Uber. I'm actually going to talk to you about what Uber is looking for when it comes to the payment solution that they use, which is the most important thing to offer convenience to their users. And they did not look at payment solutions in the US, in Silicon Valley, or in Europe, or in Asia. They actually looked at Africa, specifically Kenya. So there is a very brilliant payment solution in Kenya called M-Pesa that's developed by a telecom, Safaricom there. And basically what it does, it's the easiest way of paying, saving, and transferring money. What you do is that you just register for free, and then you use certain text on your phone, and then basically, voila, you transfer money, you pay your bill, and you can even save money and receive money as well. And what makes that extremely significant is that, one, it's cheaper than any other money transfer solution like Western Union, for instance. It works on any phone, so you don't need a smartphone to use M-Pesa. But most importantly is that it addresses a completely new market, which we call the unbanked market. So it's basically people that don't have bank accounts and still need to transfer money from the urban city where they work to their back home villages, or women that want to save money and spend on their families. So it created a new level of financial inclusion that did not exist anywhere before, and that's why M-Pesa is now becoming the largest payment or transfer solution around the world, with 11% of the GDP of Kenya is transferred through M-Pesa every year, and 9.5 million users in Kenya alone, basically. And the company behind M-Pesa, Safari.com, they power a lot of the technology that's coming out of Kenya. Yeah. You will find hackathons, and you will find tech hubs powered by Safari.com. So it's a very innovative and very fast-paced kind of development. So that's really a hotspot to look for. To look at. Let's talk a little bit more about South Africa. So what is this? So this is GovRouter, and basically what it is, it's an app that tells you real-time updates on buses and trains in South Africa. And I was looking at this actually because I was hoping when I was in South Africa to see a similar solution in Egypt, because we spoke about traffic, try to encourage people to use the subway or the trains or the buses, but then when you don't know when they're coming and you have a bus that's waiting for you and ready to cut your pay, then you definitely need a similar solution. And the most beautiful thing about it is there's many of them in South Africa, but this one in particular, look how beautiful this is. It's just very, very simple, and it's an amazing design, and it solves a great pain as well. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very local. So yeah, that's another example to be inspired about. You've met the team in South Africa. Why do you think they're successful? Because they understand the market. They understand the market very well, and they realize that there are competitors, but what matters is that we offer the service in the simplest and like in a very seamless way, like you see in this design. So it's not very complicated. And what would they need to scale globally? I mean, what are the barriers to entry if they would try and launch this kind of service, say in Cairo or in Saudi? So this particular one requires cooperation from. This particular one, I have a different screen. So basically, it requires cooperation from the railway system. So if you don't have a very cooperative, whether it's like a government or a private company, then that might be difficult. Also, the smartphone penetration. If you're in a market that doesn't have a lot of smartphone users, then this one is not going to work perfectly.
Mm-hmm. We know that also one way of finding the opportunities is to actually look at the industries that are really hot and understand what are the different players doing and what are the key success factors. And we know that messaging is really hot. We're familiar with the $19 billion bid that Facebook spent buying WhatsApp. And among the 5 largest social networks in the world, 2 of them are actually messaging services. The Chinese Qzone and WhatsApp. And here is a snapshot of a Korean service that I found interesting because of how they monetize. And the race for really finding the business model for messaging services, I mean, that's an ongoing race. And I think it's interesting to see, and it's easy to research. They're very open about the development. This one is called Kakao, and it's built a very successful service based on 4 cornerstones. They have everything from messaging, from mobile gaming to Instagram-style photo sharing, and online shopping. And the income streams, besides the gaming platform and virtual goods, is something they called Friends Plus. And Friends Plus is really a system where brands and companies pay to market through messages, content like coupons, like images, and videos to the end users. And this is a very intrusive kind of marketing, a very cluttered kind of interface. And it's interesting to see how often they innovate, how often they kind of change the interface, and how adaptive the users are. And for me, looking at different kinds of services, I'm always interested in seeing what is the real user value here. And it seems like the users are not skipping between the different parts of the service, but rather skipping between messaging services. So Koreans have 3, 4 different types of messaging services on the mobile, and based on context and interest, they skip between different kinds of services. Korea is, of course, always interesting to study because of it's one of the most gaming-crazed countries in the world, and gamification is always kind of a methodology to finding new revenue streams. And how do you conquer the world? Well, I think for the less daring of us, one recipe is really to follow the pioneers. And this is a screenshot from Millicom, Swedish Millicom, who've been building global mobile infrastructure for the last 25 years. And now they're also looking at serving these markets with innovative digital services. And one of the first, the main focus is Africa and South America. And one of the first services that the new digital venture part of Millicom are launching is a second screen kind of service for South Africa. And because you're an expert on second screen and digital content, could you talk about some of the success factors for a second screen like this service? Because a lot of different players are trying to innovate in this field.
So I guess one of the biggest success factors in any social TV app is the fact that you're able to, one, engage the audience, because like you can't have that when people are looking at a screen, on a TV screen, but then when people have their phones or their tablets and they're interacting with whatever content using an app, that's a great benefit. But also the ability to measure that interactivity. So if you have an app on a second screen, which I personally consider to be a first screen actually, on your phone or your tablet, and then you're interacting with it on whatever, or interacting with whatever you're seeing on it, you can gather a lot of information about, or a lot of data about the user base that you're dealing with using this very same app, which is something that you cannot have on a TV screen, for instance.
Latin America, is that one market from your perspective, or should Millicom really design the services to fit the different countries? This is launched in Colombia as a test market.
So when it comes to entertainment, there's definitely room for saying that there is a Latin American market, just because there's a lot of similarities when it comes to this continent. One is the language, of course. So when you produce any Spanish content or Spanish videos, then obviously the pan-Latin countries or world can actually watch that content. And there's a lot of similarities in basically in culture as well. But if you want to address what's going on in Venezuela, for instance, then it's going to have to be a very localized Venezuelan taste, basically, of your content. So there is, like, yes, there is a Latin market, but take that with also, like, you know, some salt of grain.
It's a very TV-intense market, isn't it?
It is extremely intense. Yeah, I mean, emerging markets in general, they consume content a lot, and definitely the Spanish part of the world, they consume a lot of soap operas specifically, and TV shows.
Another pioneer to watch is the German group of Rocket Internet, whom many of you perhaps are familiar with. What's their strategy?
Well, steering with pride, just learning from, you know, global competitors, but working with local talents and local partners to make that platform extremely localized, even to the level of the name of the brand. So that is something that they do very well, and that's why Amazon is not as strong, you know, going to emerging markets like Rocket Internet, for instance, taking a big chunk of that.
We have a film clip with Mark Sommer, one of the founding brothers, and can we play that, please?
Hi, my name is Kim Cutler, and I'm a writer for TechCrunch. I'm here with Mark Sommer, who's the global managing director and one of the founders of Rocket Internet. So one of the things that we've noticed is that you've been expanding a lot outside of continental Europe, and I was wondering if you could talk about the markets that most interest you outside of the continent and why.
So the markets we're mostly interested in are the emerging markets.
Yeah.
It started all with Brazil, Russia, and India about 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. So the BRICS.
The BRICS, exactly.
Yeah.
But we moved beyond that into what we consider the true emerging markets today, which is Southeast Asia and Latin and South Africa, America and Africa.
Yeah.
So we consider these markets, Southeast Asia, Africa and Latin America, the markets of tomorrow, because there is fast growth in terms of internet population, mobile penetration, huge consumer markets, growing middle classes and general income, growing GDP, and at the same time, these are underserved markets in terms of capital available for starting businesses, in terms of local entrepreneurial history, in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah.
So these are challenging markets. Yeah. But we believe they are the markets of tomorrow, because if you start building on the greatest internet models that have been built and discovered over the last 15, 20 years in the more established markets like the US and Europe and Japan and China, we think it bears indefinite opportunity to build the next group of globally super successful and large companies.
So if you want to focus on more specific areas for growth, take this advice from Spotify investor Shakil Khan. He says, the next sector is ripe for disruption from internet startups of health, financial services, and education. And we were going to talk a little bit more about education, but we're watching the clock, so we're actually going to skip that and go straight to, sorry for skipping slides. I hate when people do that, but you have it all on SlideShare and you can go back. And let's talk more about what you're doing, and let's talk about the kind of ventures that you were involved in. And I'll give the clicker to you.
Sure.
You're currently working with Qabila. What is that?
Yeah. So Qabila, it's called Qabila Media Productions, and basically what it is, it's a media production company. We like describing ourselves as storytellers. So what we do is that we create content.
That's the next slide, Perihan.
Yeah. We create content that is relevant to the Arab youth audience, specifically the Egyptian audience, mostly for social impact. We're mostly known for our brand series called Citizen's Guide to Understanding Politics, and it was like an animation series. As you can see a screenshot here, it's basically an animation series that explains different political terms. Another example, which one of my favorite productions, it's called The Blue Martian, and what it is, basically, it's a comedy or a sarcastic show, basically, about the bureaucracy in Egypt. So it tells the story of this blue Martian who was kicked out of Mars, sent to the Earth, planet Earth, and sent to Egypt. And basically, he faces all the difficult bureaucracies in Egypt in a very, very funny way, basically. And that one, like, it got very, very popular, and we actually got a celebrity to, this actor is a celebrity acting in it just because it was extremely relevant and he would love to be part of it.
Who is the target group?
Arab youth in general, specifically Egyptian youth, because they're the ones that face this every day, and they're the ones that can actually make the change. But you gotta speak their language, so you can't have a political scientist or an anthropologist go on television, or even an economist, and tell people that are aged from 15 to 35, which make up 66% of the population, and then speak in a very theoretical way. You gotta speak the language of the people that you're addressing, and that's exactly what we did, and I believe that's why we're successful. So when you basically look at the Arab world, there is like 400 million Arabic speakers in the Arab world. So there's a huge opportunity to address the Arab world when it comes to content. Why is that? Because there's 80% of the traffic that happens in Arabic on the web, but there's only 3% of the content, or 3% Arabic content on the web. And we're not very big readers either. So even if there's 100% content on the web, it's not going to work. It's got to be video content, and that only makes up 1% of the population, so of the content online. So there's a great opportunity for that. When you look specifically on YouTube, globally, there is over 6 billion hours watched on YouTube every month. There is over 100 hours uploaded every minute, and there's 80% of the traffic coming from outside of the US. And as I said, like, the Arab region is huge when it comes to that as well. This is an incredible example. I love it. It's a Saudi show, part of the same network that I showed earlier with Omar Hussein, and it's the first women's show that goes online talking about different societal things in Saudi Arabia. And the interesting thing about this one is that when it first went online, people fought it. When you see the comments, people were actually saying, why, and men specifically, I have to say, why, and a lot of women too, why are you doing a show? You should be ashamed of yourself. Your husband should be ashamed of himself for letting you go on television. What happened is that she did not go home and cry to her husband and say, I don't want to do this anymore. No, she kept going, and then the people, the other audience, her fans started fighting using those comments and saying, like, why are you on this show? This is a women's show. If you don't like it, don't go to the show. Why are you being mean to her? And she became very successful. Now she makes over 600,000 views per video, and sometimes over 1 million. And I'm going to show you, apologize, it's in Arabic, but I'm going to show you how amazing she is in video, actually, in this example, if you can play the video.
ابدا انا الفرسان موجودين هم مصروفين على الفرسان بس عارفه بالك انا صراحه الفرسان الله بيطلع لي دغري لما باذن الله يخلوا الفساتين حمراء ساعتها حتجوز باذن الله وعلى يدك ايش اللي يوجه.
So she's basically here talking about women that complain about getting married or they don't want to get married and they're talking about like dresses and stuff like that. But you can see like how she's very engaging in the way that she's talking, and something that you don't necessarily see in mainstream media. Actually, you never see in mainstream media in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Arab world. So she's an amazing example that I love showing everywhere.
I think she's so funny and so engaging. Could she become successful in markets that, I mean, if with subtitles outside of the Arabic-speaking world, do you think?
I guess in this particular kind of show, there is it has to be relevant. So basically, there has to be a sort of a hunger for similar content or understanding of what's going on in Saudi Arabia. So with subtitles, if you want to know more about the real story of how women react or interact in Saudi Arabia, then definitely she's the one to watch more than you know, reading any books or watching any like theorists basically on television.
And how is this content marketed?
YouTube. YouTube and social media. And basically, because it's very relevant, this is the kind of content that goes viral. This is the kind of content that people share on their timeline on Facebook. So when you create content that's relevant, it becomes your very own marketing tool. Mm-hmm. So speaking of content that is coming from a different side of the world to an international audience, a beautiful, beautiful narrative that an example is the documentary called The Square. And what it is, it's a crowd-funded independent documentary about what went on in Tahrir Square in 2011. And the lady, the director of this film, basically she wanted to document the story that of the Egyptian revolution. She put the video on, or the project on Kickstarter, raised over about $150,000, and then when she produced it, she submitted to Sundance Festival. She submitted the film to Sundance Festival. She won, and what happened then is that Netflix realized that this is the content that people want to see, because they did not only support it, they put their money against it. And what happened is that they got exclusive distribution, but the most beautiful news is that it got nominated for an Oscar. So again, once again, we see the power of the crowd. Basically, when you engage your audience, they tell the main players or the controllers, like distributors or producers, what we want to see. So again, you know, power of the crowd.
And this is your new project, Film Collectively. What are you aiming to do?
Yes, so since I highlighted, you know, this narrative, and I talked about how the power of the crowd is extremely important, and how we try to remove the middleman, basically, that control what people should see or what they want to do. So we're creating this platform, which is a social network for creative talents, filmmakers and writers in specific, from around the world, specifically focusing on emerging markets that want to create content for the international audience. And the way we do it is that they can crowdsource their productions basically on the platform using the network. They can engage the audience by getting them to crowdfund their productions and give them opinion, and they can distribute this very same content on the same platform. So it's a one-stop shop basically for the talent that are looking for opportunities to create content and reach a different marketplace, and for the audience that's hungry for very tailored content that's coming from the international world, but at the same time coming to their own home.
What are the success factors?
Well, finding the right talent, as I always say.
You're building this out of Boston, where you're now?
Yes. So,
but how do you source the talent?
So the talent basically, well, my team is from MIT, but we're working a lot with partners in emerging markets that will give us access. There's a lot of marketing as well, but the partners basically will give us access to filmmakers and writers in different markets, like, you know, the Arab world, like India, like Malaysia, or Nigeria specifically, where there is a lot of filmmakers there. And basically, they're the ones that will take us to the filmmakers and the writers, and then we show them the beauty of this project and basically have them on board and help them create their own productions and give that to the audience in markets like Europe or the US market. So you can actually go to this website now and you can register to know once we launch in the summer.
You've spent some time in Sweden. You know a little bit about the market. What would your advice be to us in terms of harvesting global digital opportunities?
I would say reach out to the outside world and work outside of Sweden. It's very connected here, so use that connection, and instead of just connecting with the Swedish market, go to the outside world. The opportunities are huge. The markets are extremely big. The growth rate is just much higher, so I'll definitely go to the international markets rather than just focus here.
Mm-hmm. That's the end of our presentation. I hope you're inspired. And again, the slides are on SlideShare, and please feel free to contact us with more insights, and we can build more of a base of knowledge from all of your experiences as well. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Perihan.
Thank you.
Tack, Beata.
Thank you.
You will obviously, hang on a second, you will obviously get the presents that we have for our speakers. This is the map of not the world, but of internet. That is going to be printed out and handed to you over by Yasmin.
Yeah, where do you want to live, Perihan?
The center of the world. Whatever that
you're
is.
all over. We have some comments or questions, maybe. Miriam from Twitter.
Yes, we have. Fredrik Larsson is asking, Kinnevik's Tonaton, why is it interesting to highlight that someone are copying recipes for success and pushing it into a new market?
Why is it interesting that they're copying?
To highlight an example like that, like Tonaton.
Hmm? Personally, I think understanding how to scale is more than just copying a concept. I mean, there's the infrastructure on how to roll out and keep the pace and understanding the local needs. That requires true insights. And I think also it's an example because classifieds are that's an industry that we all sort of can understand the user needs. So we thought it was a straightforward example of how a small company can actually scale globally.
Just quickly to add to that, I think if anybody is an aspiring entrepreneur, the first advice they get is that great ideas don't make great businesses. It's the execution. So if you are an aspiring entrepreneur and you want to tap into a market, you don't necessarily need to spend months and months trying to figure out a new idea that will, building an elevator to take us to Mars. No, you need to find an idea that would actually work, even if it existed before, but it's just how do you actually tailor it to the market and create a big business out of it. So that's another reason as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Are you going to hang around here during the day? or
yeah,
what?
I'm here today and tomorrow.
Perfect. So take the opportunity to speak to Perihan or to Beata, obviously. And thank you very much for coming.
She's more interesting than me.
I know, but you're very interesting as well. Thank you very much for coming.